Second Best, The Man Who Staged His Own Murder, Part 2. Previously on Second Best. Marcus Chen's best friend, David Sullivan, had executed the perfect crime, framing Marcus for attempted murder by shooting himself. With overwhelming evidence against him, Marcus became a fugitive. His wife Sarah stood by him, and together they began the impossible task of proving his innocence. But David controlling the narrative and Marcus convicted in absentia to 25 years in prison, time was running out. The manhunt intensified, and Marcus watched helplessly as David took everything: his company, his reputation, his life. Now, in Part 2, Marcus and Sarah make one final desperate play to expose the truth. Chapter 6: The Breaking Point. 8 months into life as a fugitive, Marcus Chen had lost everything. Gone was the glass office tower, the fortune, the reputation. Sarah had liquidated what little they had left that wasn't frozen by the government: her jewelry, her mother's china, the college fund they'd been saving for Emma. Emma, their 9-year-old daughter, who didn't understand why Daddy couldn't come home, why they'd moved 4 times in 8 months, why she had to use a fake name at her new school. Marcus had lost 30 pounds. His hair had grown long and he'd grown a beard to alter his appearance. He looked like a homeless man, which wasn't far from the truth. They'd stayed in motels, safe houses, once in an abandoned cabin in the mountains for 2 freezing weeks. Sarah worked remote data entry jobs under a false name. It barely paid enough to eat. And through it all, David thrived. Marcus watched from burner phones and library computers as Sullivan Analytics expanded. David gave TED Talks, did interviews with Forbes and Bloomberg, became the face of ethical business practices, the man who'd rebuilt a company after his partner's betrayal. "How do you move forward after something like that?" an interviewer asked. David smiled sadly. "You focus on the future, on the people who depend on you. Marcus's actions hurt a lot of people, but I can't let that destroy everything we built. The 47 employees of Sullivan Analytics deserve better. Our clients deserve better." It was a masterful performance. But Marcus wasn't watching David's interviews to admire them. He was studying them, frame by frame, word by word, looking for the crack Sarah insisted had to exist. And slowly, agonizingly slowly, he started to find them. It was small at first, a slip in one interview where David mentioned a meeting with a client in March, but Marcus's fabricated financial records showed the embezzlement starting in February. A timeline discrepancy of just 2 weeks, but it existed. Then there was David's hospital stay. Marcus obtained the medical records illegally, using dark web contacts and techniques he'd never imagined he'd need to learn. The bullet wound was real, but something about it nagged at him. He showed it to a former military surgeon, a guy Sarah had found through a network of people who helped fugitives. The surgeon studied the wound photos and frowned. "This angle," he said, pointing, "it's odd. The entry point, the trajectory. This wasn't someone shooting at him from a distance. This was close contact, very close. Could he have been shot during a struggle?" The surgeon shook his head slowly. "The powder burns, the tissue damage, this looks more like a self-inflicted wound. But that's crazy. Who would shoot themselves?" "Someone staging a perfect crime," Marcus said quietly. The surgeon looked at him sharply. "You're that guy, the fugitive from Seattle." Sarah tensed, her hand moving toward the door. They'd run a dozen times when people recognized Marcus. It was their standard protocol. But the surgeon held his hands. "I'm not calling anyone. Just be careful. If you're trying to prove this was self-inflicted, you'll need more than my opinion. You'll need forensic evidence, expert testimony, the works. And that's hard to get when you're on the run."
He was right. Marcus spent the next month diving deeper. He hacked into Sullivan Analytics' servers using backdoors he'd built into the system years ago, ones David didn't know about. He found the offshore accounts with the embezzled money, found the fake accounts opened in his name, but he also found something else. Client contracts, the ones David had renegotiated while impersonating Marcus. And in those contracts were signatures. Marcus's signature, forged hundreds of times. Marcus was good with technology, but handwriting analysis wasn't his expertise. He needed a professional. Sarah found one, a forensic document examiner named Dr. Patricia Walsh, retired from the FBI. She agreed to look at the signatures for cash, no questions asked. "These are very good forgeries," Dr. Walsh said, examining the documents through a magnifying glass. "Professional level, but they're not perfect. See here," she pointed, to the loop in the M of Marcus. "The pressure is wrong, too even. When you sign your own name, you have muscle memory. The pen moves naturally with variation in pressure and speed. Forgers practice to get the shape right, but they can't replicate that unconscious variation." "So these aren't my signatures?" "Definitely not. You sign with more pressure at the beginning and end of letters, lighter in the middle. These signatures have consistent pressure throughout. It's a telltale sign of forgery, someone carefully drawing your signature rather than naturally writing it." It was proof, real, tangible proof that someone had been impersonating Marcus. But Marcus still needed to prove someone was David. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source, Richard Howe, the Chinese investor whose assistant had testified about the Singapore meeting. Sarah, using a fake identity, managed to contact Howe's company. She posed as a journalist writing a book about corporate fraud and wanted to verify some details about Sullivan Analytics. Howe's current assistant, a different woman than Li Wei, was happy to help. "Oh yes, Mr. Howe remembers that meeting very well. It was unusual because Mr. Chen seemed so different than the previous meetings." "Different how?" "More aggressive, more American," Mr. Howe said. He found it odd because in earlier video conferences, Mr. Chen had always been very soft-spoken, careful with his words. But in Singapore, he was loud, assertive. Mr. Howe thought perhaps the pressure was getting to him. Earlier video conferences? Sarah's heart rate spiked. When were those? "Let me check. We have records going back 2 years. Mr. Chen participated in virtual meetings with our board in November 2023, January 2024, and February 2024. Sarah thanked her and hung up. Then she turned to Marcus, her eyes bright. "David couldn't have impersonated you on video conferences. That's impossible with today's technology, which means the real me was at those meetings," Marcus finished. "But David told Richard Howe's people that I'd be at the Singapore meeting in person. He must have canceled the video option and showed up himself, pretending to be me. And if we can prove you were somewhere else when that Singapore meeting happened, we can prove David impersonated me." Marcus pulled up his calendar from the year before. The Singapore meeting had been on March 14th, 2024. On March 14th, 2024, Marcus was in Boston, giving the keynote speech at the annual Tech Vision conference. There were photos, videos, hundreds of witnesses, conference attendance records with his signature, his real signature. "We've got him," Sarah whispered. But getting proof and getting anyone to listen to that proof were two different things. Marcus was a convicted fugitive. Even if he came forward with this evidence, who would believe him? David had spent months building a narrative of Marcus's mental instability, his paranoia, his desperate attempts to avoid responsibility. They needed more. They needed undeniable proof. They needed to catch David in a lie so big, so obvious, that no one could ignore it. And then Sarah had an idea. "We don't try to prove your innocence," she said slowly. We make David prove his story. We make him perform the lie again in public, where everyone can see. How? Sarah smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. David loves being in the spotlight. He's done a dozen interviews about the attack, about his recovery, about moving forward. What if we give him the biggest stage yet? Sarah. TED is doing a series on resilience, business leaders who overcame adversity. David would kill for that kind of exposure. Marcus understood. We get him to TED. We get him to tell his story again in front of thousands of people, recorded in 4K, and then we expose every lie in real time with evidence so overwhelming that he can't spin his way out of it.
Chapter 7. The Trap. Over the next 3 months, Sarah orchestrated the most elaborate con of their lives. Using fake social media accounts, she started a grassroots campaign praising David Sullivan's resilience. Blog posts appeared analyzing his leadership, fake testimonials from employees about how his inspiring example had helped them through hard times. She created a Change.org petition, Give David Sullivan a TED Talk. It got 50,000 signatures, all purchased from ClickFarms, but TED didn't know that. Podcasters started covering his story, reaching out for interviews. Sarah, posing as various podcast hosts, asked David increasingly leading questions, getting him to elaborate on his version of events, to add details, to embellish. Every word was recorded, every detail cataloged. And David, loving the attention, gave them everything they needed. He told the story of the attack so many times that it became polished, perfected, a performance piece. He described the fear in Marcus's eyes, the gun shaking in his hand, the moment of pulling the trigger. I genuinely thought I was going to die, David said in one podcast. But in that moment, I just felt sad. Sad for Marcus, for what he'd become, for the friendship we'd lost. Sarah made sure every interview was archived, transcribed, analyzed. And then, a year after the conviction, TED reached out to David Sullivan. We'd love to have you speak, the email read. Your story of resilience and forgiveness is exactly what we're looking for. David said yes immediately. The talk was scheduled for 3 months away. That gave Marcus and Sarah time to prepare, time to gather every piece of evidence, time to plan the perfect counterattack. They would have one chance, and they weren't going to waste it. The TED Theater in downtown Seattle held 1,200 people. Another 50,000 were watching the live stream. David Sullivan stood backstage adjusting his tie, running through his speech one more time. He looked good. The bullet wound had healed to an impressive scar, one he wore like a badge of honor. He'd lost weight, started working out, hired a stylist. He looked like a survivor, a winner. Resilience in the Face of Betrayal was the title of his talk. He'd rehearsed it 100 times. It was perfect. The introduction began. The host smiled at the camera. Our next speaker needs no introduction. Over a year ago, he survived an assassination attempt by his own business partner. Today, he's here to share his story of survival, forgiveness, and moving forward. Please welcome David Sullivan. The audience applauded. David walked onto the stage, waving, his smile humble and grateful. He stepped onto the famous red circle and took a breath. "Thank you," he began. 15 months ago, my best friend tried to kill me." The audience was silent, hanging on every word. David told his story, the perfect partnership, the discovery of embezzlement, the confrontation, the gun, the shooting. His voice broke in all the right places. "Marcus wasn't always like this," David said in one podcast. "The man I knew, the friend I loved, he was brilliant, kind, generous. But something changed. The pressure, the money, the success, it corrupted him." People in the audience were crying. "I could hate him," David continued, "but I refuse. I refuse to let hate win.
because holding on to anger is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. So I forgive him. Wherever he is, wherever he's hiding, Marcus, I forgive you." The applause was thunderous. David didn't see Marcus in the crowd, but he should have. The Q&A session began. 3 people asked softball questions about leadership and resilience. David answered each one perfectly. And then someone stood up in the back. At first, David didn't recognize him. The man had a full beard, longer hair, glasses. He looked thin, worn, nothing like the Marcus Chen from the company photos. But the voice was unmistakable. "I have a question," Marcus said, and the room went absolutely silent. David's face went white. Security started moving toward Marcus, but he spoke quickly. "How did you shoot yourself at that exact angle? The trajectory, the powder burns, they're consistent with self-infliction, not a struggle. Isn't that right, Dr. Patricia Walsh?" A woman stood up in the 3rd row, the forensic document examiner. She nodded. "The gunshot wound shows characteristics of self-infliction. The angle of entry, the concentration of powder burns, the precision of placement, all consistent with someone deliberately shooting themselves in a non-fatal location." The audience murmured. Phones came out. Marcus continued, "And how did you meet with Richard Howe in Singapore on March 14, 2024, when I was in Boston giving a keynote speech to 700 witnesses?" The screens behind David suddenly switched. Medical records appeared, the gunshot wound analysis, then photos of Marcus at the Tech Vision conference in Boston, time-stamped and dated, conference programs with his name, videos of him on stage. That's not," Marcus finished. "Not possible? No, it's not, unless you impersonated me, which is exactly what you did, for months, maybe years." More images flooded the screens. Security footage of David entering the conference room slowed down and enhanced. In his hand, barely visible but definitely there, the gun. He'd had it before Marcus even arrived. The security feed was corrupted for 47 seconds during the attack. Very convenient. But the backup systems, the ones you didn't know about, David, the ones I installed myself, weren't corrupted. New footage appeared. This version showed everything. David pulling out the gun, raising it to his own side, the moment of hesitation, then pulling the trigger. "Oh my God," someone whispered in the audience. "The forged signatures on client contracts, the offshore accounts opened in my name, the meetings where Marcus Chen acted erratically, except I wasn't at those meetings. You were." Document after document appeared on the screens, forensic handwriting analysis, timeline comparisons, bank records showing the real source of the embezzled funds. The private investigator I hired, Rita Valdez, was an actress you paid to pretend to be a private investigator, to gain Marcus Chen's trust and report everything back to David. A woman stood up in the audience, terrified but nodding. "He paid me $20,000 to pretend to be a private investigator, to gain Marcus Chen's trust and report everything back to David." The audience was in chaos. Security had stopped moving. They were frozen, unsure what to do. David stood on stage, his face a mask of shock and rage. "You're lying. You're a fugitive, a convicted criminal." "Convicted based on your lies," Marcus said, "based on evidence you manufactured, but you made mistakes." "What mistakes?" David snapped, and instantly realized his error. "Like getting Emma's grade wrong when you impersonated me with Jennifer Park," Marcus said quietly. "Like claiming I met with clients alone when that was never our arrangement. Like shooting yourself at an angle no struggle could produce." The evidence kept coming. More testimony, more contradictions, more proof. "You wanted everything," Marcus said. "The company, the glory, the reputation, and you were willing to destroy me to get it." "You're insane," David shouted, but his voice was shaking. "You're a desperate fugitive making up lies." Then explain the backup footage. Explain how I was in Boston and Singapore simultaneously. Explain the forensic evidence. Explain all of it. David couldn't. His mouth opened and closed, but no words came, and in that moment, everyone saw the truth written across his face. Guilt. David's legs gave out. He stumbled backward. This is... His carefully constructed persona crumbled. You don't understand. You don't know what it's like to always be second, to work just as hard and get none of the credit. So you tried to kill me. I didn't try to kill you, David screamed. I shot myself. It was supposed to be perfect. You were supposed to go to prison, and I was supposed to finally be first for once in my goddamn life. The confession echoed through the silent theater. The live stream had captured everything. David seemed to realize what he'd just said. His face went pale. That's not what I meant. But it was too late. FBI agents entered from 3 different doors. David Sullivan, one of them said, approaching with handcuffs, "You're arrested for fraud, perjury, attempted murder conspiracy, and a whole lot more." David looked at Marcus, and their eyes met. In David's gaze, Marcus saw fear. Real, genuine fear. "Marcus," David said quietly, 20 years of friendship. That has to count for something." Marcus walked closer to the stage. "You were right about one thing," Marcus said. "Some of us were meant to win, but you forgot something important." "What?" David snapped. "The best lies are simple. Your lie was too perfect, too elaborate, too many
Chapter 8. The Reckoning. The retrial took 3 months, but the outcome was never in doubt. With the TED Talk confession broadcasted to millions, with the mountain of evidence Marcus and Sarah had compiled, the prosecution's case collapsed. Marcus's new attorney, Catherine Price, systematically dismantled every piece of evidence from the original trial. David Sullivan didn't just frame Marcus Chen, she told the jury. He created an entirely fictional version of reality. And when all that wasn't enough, he shot himself, deliberately, precisely. He put a bullet in his own body, all to frame an innocent man for attempted murder. The jury was transfixed. Witness after witness took the stand. Jennifer Park, Richard Howe from Singapore, Michelle Kern, the fake investigator, Dr. Patricia Walsh with her forensic analysis, and the backup security footage played again, showing David shooting himself while Marcus stood frozen in shock. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. On all counts of fraud, identity theft, perjury, conspiracy to commit murder, and criminal defamation, we find the defendant, David Sullivan, guilty. The sentencing was 2 weeks later. Judge Margaret Thornton looked at David with undisguised contempt. "Mr. Sullivan, in my 30 years on the bench, I have never seen a crime quite like this. The premeditation, the manipulation, the utter disregard for justice and truth. It's breathtaking in its audacity." She picked up her sentencing document. On the count of attempted murder conspiracy, 15 years. On fraud and embezzlement, 10 years consecutive. On perjury and obstruction, 5 years consecutive. On identity theft, 5 years consecutive. 35 years total. Additionally, you are ordered to pay full restitution to Marcus Chen exceeding $20 million. The gavel came down. As David was led away in handcuffs, he stopped beside Marcus. "You won," David said quietly. "No, I survived. That's not the same thing." Epilogue, 5 years later. 5 years after David's sentencing, Marcus stood in front of a modest office building. The sign read, "Chen Analytics, Ethical AI Solutions." It was smaller than before, humbler, but it was his, built with integrity. Sarah stood beside him, holding Emma's hand. Their daughter was 14 now, adjusted and thriving. The business grew slowly but steadily. Marcus focused on ethical applications, AI for medical diagnostics, environmental monitoring, educational support. I spent 10 years building something that could be stolen. Now I'm building something that matters, he told Sarah one night. The civil suit awarded Marcus $28 million. He donated most of it to organizations supporting wrongful conviction cases. I don't want David's money. I want to help people who went through what I did but didn't have the resources to fight back. One evening, Marcus received a letter from David. Inside was a single page. Marcus, I know you won't forgive me. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I need you to know something. You were always the better man, Marcus. I just couldn't accept being second best, so I tried to destroy you, and in doing so, I destroyed myself. I hope you build something amazing. I hope Emma grows up happy. I hope Sarah knows how lucky she is. Enjoy your life, Marcus. You earned it. David. Marcus read it twice, then folded it carefully and put it in his desk drawer. He didn't burn it, but he didn't respond either. Some wounds heal, some don't, and some just scar over, becoming part of who you are. That night, Marcus's phone rang. Unknown number. Marcus? It was David's voice, older and rougher. What do you want, David? I saw your TED Talk. You looked happy, and I realized that's what I took from you. Not the money, your happiness. You're right, Marcus interrupted. It doesn't mean anything. I was happy before you betrayed me. I was devastated when you framed me, and I'm happy again now. Your apology doesn't change that. I just needed... Listen, David, carefully. You don't get to call me. You don't get to apologize to assuage your guilt. What you did was evil, calculated, unforgivable. The fact that you're in prison, that's not my burden. That's yours. You did this to yourself. Marcus, please. I've moved on. I have a good life, a family that loves me, work that matters, and I'm not letting you take up space in my head anymore. So don't call again, don't write, don't reach out. You're part of my past, and that's where you're staying. Marcus hung up. He blocked the number and went back inside, where Sarah and Emma were making dinner, arguing about whether pineapple belonged on pizza. This was his life now, messy, imperfect, but real. David Sullivan had tried to take it all, but he failed, because the truth, Marcus had learned, is heavier than any lie, and in the end, truth always wins. Not easily, not quickly, not without cost, but it wins. The end. The end.
Your turn. This story proves that even the most perfect crime has cracks. Marcus and Sarah found those cracks and pulled at them until David's entire web of lies unraveled. Now I want to hear from you. What would you have done in Marcus's position? Would you have run or turned yourself in immediately? Would you have trusted Sarah to help investigate or tried to protect her by keeping her out of it? And here's the big question. Do you think Marcus should have forgiven David? Some say forgiveness is for yourself, not the other person. Others say some betrayals are simply unforgivable. What's your take? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. The best response will be featured in next week's Community Spotlight. If this story had you on the edge of your seat, hit that like button and subscribe to Tales Thread. We bring you the most gripping true crime and thriller stories every week. Stories about deception, justice, and the unbreakable human spirit. Until next time, remember, the truth always finds a way. Sometimes it just needs someone brave enough to chase it. Comment, like, subscribe.